Okay.
Okay, today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the old days, which I call the old days, which was in the 50s and the 60s. So what I would like to do is tell you a little bit about the way we used to come to school, how we got here and so forth, and how a normal day went, and what we did throughout the whole year, which will give you an idea. I've talked to a couple of people who were in school at the same time I was, and I just asked them, how did you get to school? Because I never thought about that before, because myself and about 10 others that used to live in New Orleans or in the New Orleans area, it was great for us. We got on the train at 5 o'clock in New Orleans, got a sleeper, went to bed, and when we woke up at 10 o'clock, we were in Gainesville. So it was a great trip. That's the way we did. I can only remember one time actually flying back at Christmas or at the end of the year. I don't remember exactly when it was, but most of the time we either went by train or our parents brought us to school, which was the way I think most people did. Of course, air traffic was not anything like it is now. Everything's so much easier to fly one way or the other. Well, anyway, we got here about 10 o'clock in the morning at the train station, where one of the school buses would pick us up and bring us out to school, and then we'd be told one of the cadets in the white hat covers will take care of you and show you what you're supposed to do. So that's what we did. We connected with one of the people, and it turns out that those were people that were trying out for the Horton Society. That's the way they used to do it, by the work that they did with the new boys before school started. So they were assigned to take care of you and answer any questions that you might have. We got integrated into the group pretty quickly. And it was a good way to do it. I'm sure there's better ways. Some of the things we do now are a whole lot better than what we used to do. But you were really supposed to take care of yourself most of the time. I was fortunate my first year, when I was in the 8th grade, my brother was in his 3rd year, and he was a 2nd lieutenant at the time. So I most probably didn't get picked on as much as somebody else would have been. But the first week in school was a little scary, I'll tell you straight up, because I had never really been away from home for any real length of time. But luckily he was in the same building that I was, which was Old South Barracks. He lived a room away from me, which is most probably better. I don't think he would want to be in the same room. But anyway, everything was going pretty well. One of the rough things the first year we would have, my grandfather died about a week after we were here, and our folks made the decision that we didn't need to go home for the funeral and things like that. So that was a little tough. Homesickness got to me one time. Back in the old days, you had to write a letter home every Sunday, and it was picked up by your hall officer, and then they were mailed the next morning. Well, the first time I tried to write a letter, I just broke down, crying big crocodile tears. But I will say that's the only time it really got to me. But the first time I tried to write a letter, I went, oh Lord, this is not what I want. This isn't what I say. But anyway, and like I say, I was in the 8th grade. My brother was one of the big men on campus. He was a junior and he was a 2nd lieutenant. And he was a platoon leader, and he was one of the better athletes in school. So the first semester was really a lot of fun. Now, what a lot of y'all that most probably have been through school in the later years don't realize, the only holiday we had during the school year was Christmas. That's it. Everybody says, well, what about Thanksgiving? Thanksgiving came and went. We didn't pay much attention to it. In fact, I think we had beanie weenies the day Thanksgiving Day. In fact, I'm pretty sure we did. But anyway, Riverside worked on a merit-demerit system. You had to earn enough merits. It was just like money. to go home or to do any kind of leave or anything like that. So most of us were at school on Thanksgiving. And we went through, and of course the first semester eventually came to an end. And then the big thing for us back then was the last week you were taking exams usually, and then the day before you left, you packed everything that you had, put it in your trunks and your duffel bag, and you got in big lines out here in front of big trailer trucks, and you loaded up the trailer trucks with your trunks and your duffel bags. The only thing you kept out was something that you had to wear for the next day so you could go home for Christmas. But when you went home for Christmas, all of your baggage was shipped to Florida. They went down there and they unloaded it when they got there, and then they just put it in different spots in Florida, in the school building and in the main building down in Florida. And then when you got back down to Florida after the Christmas holidays, you went and picked up your luggage and things like that, and then you went and got in your room, you got everything straight there and started your Florida time. So that was a lot of fun. Florida was really different. Each company had a day where they could go to the beach. Like on a Monday, A company went to the beach during athletics in the afternoon. On Tuesday, B company went to the beach in the afternoon. On Wednesday, which was town day to us, everybody was off on Wednesday afternoon. So you could either go to town, they ran buses to town back and forth, or you could go to the beach. They'd run to the beach, and then you could stay there till about 5 o'clock. We'd load up and come back. Then on Thursday, C company went to the beach. Then on Friday, D company went to the beach. And yes, we had parades every Sunday. No matter what, we had a parade on Sunday. The schedule on Sunday was really chiseled in stone. You got up about 9 o'clock in the morning, you had Sunday morning inspection at 10 o'clock, you ate breakfast, then you were sort of off. You could go to the beach again on Sunday. If you got back, you had to come back by 2:30. Chapel was at 3, parade was at 4, supper was at 5. So that was the same all the time. It never changed. And then we'd be in Florida, of course, January, February, and March. Now the one real good plus we had of the Hollywood campus was our athletic teams, like track, soccer, baseball, all those were able to practice during the winter. And then by the time we got back up here in late March, everybody up in Gainesville was just starting track and baseball and stuff. We'd been playing for 2 months. So we always had a great advantage of people when we came back from Florida. The bus trip from Florida, that's another thing we'll have to talk about when we got plenty of time. Because I'm sure Barney Rothgary, one of our 55 graduates, would love to tell you all about trips back and forth to Florida. Just to let you know, about the last week in March, we'd all do the same thing again, load everything on trailer vans, and they would come up the road, and then they'd drop them off up here, and then we'd get on buses on a Friday. The school buses usually left early in the morning because they were a little slower than the Greyhounds. The other people would get on Greyhounds, and they'd come behind us. Of course, back then, the Sunshine State Parkway went to Fort Pierce. That's it. Everything else was 2-lane roads. But like I said, the trips back from Hollywood were another story. We could do a whole thing on that. But anyway, we'd come back up about the last week in March. And then we'd come back and we'd have, of course, we'd go through our MidSouth Championships and athletics and things like that. And that's what we were in at that time, the old Mid-South Association. But the school year ran, we usually got out about May, usually anywhere from May 15th to May 28th is where we would usually graduate. And back then, everybody, during graduation, once we had graduation, everybody left. It's not like it is now. It's so much better now, it's not even funny. This is a whole lot better way to do it, the way we do it right now. But, talking about a regular week in Riverside, like when we first got there, and then in September, October, November, December, Monday and Tuesday was regular days. We had drill every afternoon on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. We had rifle inspections usually on Thursday afternoon. But we had town day on Wednesday and a town day on Saturday. Of course, most of the athletes never got to go to town during the week because you were always practicing. So myself, with football and stuff, I never saw Gainesville very much except on Saturdays. And you could go to town. Of course, everybody either went to town, you went to the Collegiate Grill to eat, and at that time there was a movie right next door to it, and there was another one across the square on the other side of town. So that's what we did, basically, unless you were one of the lover boys and you headed to Bernal, which was good. I only did that for 2 years, but I never was much for Bernal. That old lady that used to run that place over there, I never got real close to her. She didn't like me much. But anyway, I don't think she liked anybody much. But anyway, Miss Brannon, I can remember that. Her name was Brannon. But anyway, that's usually what a week was. You would work in most of the time, and then on Wednesday you could go to town. Saturdays and Sundays were more or less relaxed. But we didn't go to school on Saturdays unless we were trying to make something up, or the general used to tell us we'd go to school and get out a day earlier or something like that. So that's the kind of thing we did. That's an awful lot of things. I talked to you about the merits and the demerits. In the old code book, you could get 1 demerit up to 100 demerits. I mean, they went from an A1, which was a dirty fingernail, to breaking barracks after taps, which was 100 demerits. You went, A's were 1 demerit, B's were 2 demerits, C's were 3 demerits, D's were 5, H's were 25, G's were 20, and I's were 50, and if you got a K report, that was 100. So those were automatic things. The main thing is you were allowed 15 demerits a week. In other words, if you got 15 demerits during the week, your deportment grade that week was 85. So you kept track of what you were doing on that. Now, if you had accumulated some merits, you were allowed to cancel. After 15, you could cancel up to 35 with merits. In other words, 1 for 1. In other words, if you had a bunch of merits, you could have a 65 in deportment and not be in any trouble. But if you didn't have any merits, if you got over 15, you were on what we used to call the bull ring. Now what you did on the bull ring was either walk around in a circle with your coveralls on, or you were on some work detail going around raking leaves or doing things like that. The great duty at that time was to work in Mrs. Beaver's rose garden, because she used to treat those kids great up there. They had orange juice, they had all kind of things, but she took care of the group that took care of her roses up there, and she had some beautiful roses. But of course the bull ring was not something you wanted to be on. We had quite a few kids that used to stay on the bull ring, but you wanted to stay out of trouble. Colonel May, back at that time, was the commandant, and I still say at his job he was the best I believe there's ever been. I don't think the man ever slept, because he was around all hours of the night. He and Colonel Beaver, of course Colonel Beaver left, the general's son, Colonel Beaver left in 1963 because he had gotten real ill and he decided to retire. But when Colonel May and Colonel Beaver were together, I don't know how they did what they did, but they were everywhere. If something was going on, they knew about it. Absolutely. I remember, got to be careful what I say here. I remember we started a club called Hell Incorporated that was sort of take care of other people. We had cards and everything. And one night at formation, when I was a company commander, A Company, Colonel Beaver called me up on the porch. We used to have formations out on what is now the McLendon Quad, which we called Lanier Parade at that time. But we had formation out there every morning and every night. And Colonel Beaver called me up to the porch and he said, "Bisso." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I understand there's an organization in school here that has started." I said, "Sir?" He says, "By the time supper's over with, it better be disbanded." So by the time supper was over with, there was no more Hell Incorporated. But that was a much tougher day back then. Things were a little bit more physical than they are now, which is great. Can't do some of the things we used to do, but everything was above board and everything was square. There was no piling on anybody. Wasn't stuff like hitting people with soap and things like that when they're in their beds. That stuff didn't go on. But everybody sort of knew if you did something wrong, it's not a very good idea to do it, because sooner or later it's going to catch up to you. And any kind of punishment was doled out by the cadets themselves, and those kind of things sort of stuck. You know, if somebody was caught doing something, very seldom would anybody else do anything again. But that was a different time. This is a different time. Not saying it's any better, any worse. It's just the way it was. And it was a lot tougher then. Now everybody jumps on their cell phone. That wouldn't have been something that we did. But the cadet leaders really earned their positions. You couldn't be a cadet officer until you were taking Military 3, which means you're a third year. But now that's a lot different. They tend to give rank to upperclassmen, which are juniors and seniors. And I guess that's more or less the West Point way, the way of doing things. Citadel, West Point, those people, they do things like that. But learning their jobs is the big thing back then. Talking to myself, I went from corporal my second year, excuse me. The first year you were awarded rank on grades, so that means I was a private the whole year. Second year I came back, I was a corporal, and my brother, the second year I was back, was the lieutenant colonel. He was a battalion commander. So, you know, I had to watch my P's and Q's. But I was lucky. I went from corporal to sergeant, which is an assistant squad leader back in those days. And then by the end of the year, I was a sergeant first class, which was a squad leader. So I was able to move up the ladder. Back then you had efficiencies every 6 weeks, and you had a relative rank list that you were on. You knew exactly where you stood each day. You knew where you were relative rank-wise. And they would promote you one time on efficiencies and another time on a relative rank. So you had to work your way up the ladder. But Riverside back then was very interesting. Now, like I say, a lot of people back then, I called a couple of people because I really wasn't sure about it. Some of them flew to school, but I know when we went to Florida after Christmas, our folks used to drive us down to Florida. So that was about the same for most people. Of course, like I said before, I believe Gary and I only flew home one time, and that was at the end of his junior year and my first year. I believe that was the only time we were ever on a plane. Most of the time it was a train or it was a car. So that's the way it was. And of course, when Barney gets here, I'm going to sit down with him, and then we're going to talk a little bit more, because I know I've left some things out. But that gives you an idea of what went on. It was really great to do things back in the old days. Of course, I wouldn't want to do some of it again, but I guess that's the same way with everything.